What's up guys, Sagi here, and welcome to another Tech Gear Talk. Today we're going to compare the Canon M50 to the newer M6 Mark II. I've had the M50 since it came out. It's been one of my favorite cameras and one that I recommend all the time. It's small, it's portable, it's easy to use, has dual pixel autofocus, shoots in 4K, has a fully articulating touchscreen, and does in-body image stabilization. Then Canon came out with the all-new M6 Mark II. It's got higher resolution sensor, added buttons and dials, uncropped 4K with dual pixel autofocus, and a clean HDMI out. I'm going to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of both of these mirrorless cameras when it comes to photography and video, and hopefully I can help you decide which option is best for you. My goal with every camera comparison is to give you a detailed overview of the cameras and compare them in a way that relates to real life use. I'll go over some of the important specs of these two cameras, but I'm going to focus on sharing my actual user experience with you. Before getting to the detailed comparison, I'm going to quickly go over some key features in case you're just starting your research. The M50 has a 24 megapixel APS-C CMOS sensor, and it uses Canon's dual pixel autofocus system, which is awesome. It has the new Digic 8 processor, which improves speed, performance, and image quality. It has a 3-inch fully articulating touchscreen LCD and can shoot video at up to 4K at 24 frames per second. Combination image stabilization uses 5-axis digital image stabilization together with lens-based IS. There's a really nice OLED electronic viewfinder, has Wi-Fi and Bluetooth so that you can easily move images to your mobile device, and you have full control of the camera for both photography and video using the Canon Camera Connect app. The M6 Mark II has a 32 megapixel APS-C CMOS sensor and also uses the Digic 8 processor. It uses a 5481 point dual pixel autofocus system when using the optional viewfinder or the LCD. It has a 3-inch 1.04 million dot flip touchscreen. It can record 4K at 30 frames per second, can shoot full HD or 1080p at up to 120 frames per second for slow motion, but with some limitations that I'm going to talk about later on. We've got a 3.5mm mic input, in-body 1080p and 4K time-lapse, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth for remote control and easy file sharing, and finally, it also offers digital image stabilization that can work together with lens-based IS. Okay, let's get to the comparison. And I want to mention that the M50 currently sells for $579 and the M6 Mark II sells for $850. But there is a missing piece here that might make the M6 Mark II more expensive. I want to start out by talking about the sensor and the processor. Both cameras use the Digic 8 processor, but the M50 has a 24 megapixel APS-C CMOS sensor, and the M6 Mark II comes with the newer and higher resolution 32 megapixel CMOS sensor. We'll talk about performance for photography and video in a later section, but there are some significant advantages to the new sensor. Both cameras are super fast to operate, and you can see startup speed tests in my dedicated reviews. The combination of sensor and processor on both cameras produced very nice images and video for me. I love Canon's color processing, and I was happy with the overall image quality, which I'll discuss more in that section. Because of how I shoot, one of the features that I look at for every camera that I get is continuous or burst shooting. You can just point the camera at a subject, hold down the shutter, and the camera will just keep firing. This is a nice feature if you're photographing sports, kids running around, pets, or any fast-moving subject. Of course, the more frames you have per second, the more exposures you'll have to pick from later on. The M50 can shoot it up to 7 frames per second with full AI servo AF, and the M6 Mark II can shoot it up to 14 frames per second. So that means the M6 Mark II gives you twice as many shots to select from. When we look at buffer memory with the M50, we're looking at 33 images when shooting JPEG and 10 images when shooting RAW, versus 54 JPEG and 23 RAW images for the M6 Mark II. The M6 Mark II is the clear winner here because it has a burst frame rate that is twice the speed of the M50, and we can shoot for longer before filling up the buffer. The M6 Mark II also offers a RAW burst mode, which uses a cropped version of the sensor and gives you 30 frames per second, which is really nice when you're trying to just nail that exact moment. Moving on, one of the most important things for me with any tool that I use is ergonomics in terms of both handling and user experience. The M50 and the M6 Mark II are both mirrorless cameras, and they're close enough in size and weight to where that's not much of a factor when it comes to portability. The grip on the M6 Mark II is a little deeper and the rubber coating is a little more textured. And Canon added it to both sides, which make the M6 Mark II a little more comfortable to hold and it feels more secure in my hand. Moving on to the viewfinders, the M50 has a built-in electronic viewfinder and the M6 Mark II actually doesn't come with a viewfinder at all. There is an optional electronic viewfinder called the EVF DC2, which Canon includes if you buy the M6 Mark II in the US with a kit lens. Again, there are pros and cons here. It's nice that the M50 includes a viewfinder with the price of the body because unless you're buying the M6 Mark II with the kit lens in the US, you're looking at spending an additional $200, which now brings the price of the M6 Mark II to $1,050. On the other hand, I very rarely use a viewfinder, so I love the fact that I can remove it from the M6 Mark II and get an even smaller footprint. This is especially important to me when I use the M6 Mark II with a small gimbal like the Zhiyun M2, and I don't have to worry about the viewfinder hitting the back of the gimbal. One drawback to the M6 Mark II design is that because the EVF takes up the hot shoe, you can't use an external flash or trigger while using the viewfinder. And that can be a deal breaker for some photographers. Next, I want to discuss the buttons and dials on these cameras. I think if you're buying a camera and you're just using it with the factory settings, you're kind of missing out. Part of what you get when you're buying a higher end camera is the ability to customize it to work better for how you shoot. The M50 has a top dial that can be used for aperture and shutter speed, but you have to press a button on the back of the camera to toggle this functionality. There's also a multi-function button next to the shutter, which I have set to ISO. And that rounds out the three most common elements that I change. The M6 Mark II has two top dials and a rear dial, so you can easily adjust aperture, shutter speed, and ISO without having to use a custom button. There's also a great dial function button, which we saw in the EOS R, and it lets you quickly toggle the functionality of the rear dial and make adjustments to some additional features. I definitely prefer the user experience with the M6 Mark II, especially when it comes to photography, because I can change all three parts of the exposure triangle with dedicated controls. For video, this is a little less important because I'm rarely changing shutter speed, but it's still nice to be able to change aperture and ISO without hitting an extra button. Both cameras use Canon's quick menu, which is triggered by using the Q button on the back or the Q icon on the touchscreen, which I'll get to later on in this video. The quick menu brings up the features and settings that you're most commonly changing, and it allows you to make these changes using the directional buttons or the touchscreen. The main menu system is super easy to learn and use, and this is something that continues to be a strength for Canon. As far as battery life, the M50 uses the LPE12 battery and it's rated for 235 shots. The M6 Mark II uses the LPE17 battery and it's rated for 305 shots. So we're getting about a 20% increase in battery life due to the larger battery. I did a dedicated video showing 3 ways to solve this battery life issue, and I'll link to that video up in the corner and in the description. Those same solutions work for the M6 Mark II with a different coupler. One last advantage for the M6 Mark II is that the battery can be charged in camera if you're using a PD or power delivery capable power source. And please don't go spending $190 on Canon's PDE1. There are a lot more affordable options and I'll link to a few of them in the description. Next, I want to talk about resolution, frame rate, and image quality. For photography, the M50 offers a 6,000 by 4,000 pixel image, and the M6 Mark II has a maximum image resolution of 6960 by 4640, which is quite a bit bigger. When shooting stills, this means that you'll have more flexibility when cropping on the M6 Mark II's higher resolution sensor. This isn't something that's necessarily going to be important for every person because 24 megapixels is plenty for what most people are going to use. Both cameras can shoot in JPEG and RAW, so you can decide just how much information you want to capture depending on what you plan on doing with these images in post-production. I was super happy with the images I got from both cameras, and for the price, the images were sharp with good dynamic range. Image quality was better on the M6 Mark II if you used higher end lenses like the 32mm f1.4, a 22mm f2, or adapted L-series EF lenses. If you're using any of the Zoom EFM lenses and are mostly posting your images on the web, you probably won't notice much of a difference. For video, the M50 offers 4K at 24 frames per second and Full HD at 24, 30, and 60 frames per second. The M6 Mark II offers 4K at 30 frames per second and Full HD or 1080p at 30 and 60 frames per second. There is a high frame rate option which gives us 1080p at 120 frames per second, but there's no autofocus, so you'll have to use manual focus, which is limiting, but it's better than not having it at all. What's missing here is the option for 24 frames per second with the M6 Mark II in both 4K and 1080p. But Canon has announced that it's releasing a new firmware update which will add 24 frames per second in both 4K and Full HD, just like it did to the similarly featured 90D. The M6 Mark II has two significant advantages over the M50 when it comes to 4K. First, there is no additional crop, whereas the M50 has a 1.7x crop, which makes it very difficult to get wide-angle shots in 4K. The second advantage is that the M6 Mark II uses the dual-pixel autofocus system when shooting in 4K, while the M50 switches to a contrast detection autofocus system, which is slower, less reliable, and struggles in low light. Overall, I'm very happy with the 1080 footage from both cameras, but I'm giving the advantage to the M6 Mark II in 4K because there's no crop and we have dual pixel autofocus system, which means I can shoot without having to worry about any type of focus hunting. Next, let's talk about time-lapse. Both cameras come with in-body 1080p and 4K time-lapse, meaning that the cameras will actually compile the time-lapse for you so it's ready to be viewed. And here's where we see another significant advantage for the M6 Mark II. The M50 has a minimum shutter speed of 1/30th of a second when shooting time-lapse. There are a lot of times when I want a slower shutter speed when I'm shooting a time-lapse because I want to add more motion blur. It might be for clouds, or I want light streaks when I'm shooting at night, and it's nice to see that this limit was removed with the M6 Mark II and I can shoot with much slower shutter speeds. Another advantage of the M6 Mark II is that it can record up to 4K 30 422 8-bit using a clean HDMI out. This is super useful because it gives us great footage to work with and gets around the 30-minute recording limit, which both of these cameras have when recording internally. The clean HDMI out also means that I can easily live stream with continuous autofocus and get amazing sharp video that's always in focus. The M50 does not have a clean HDMI out, so the only way to use it for live streaming is to use manual focus or use a special software that removes the white autofocus indicator from the screen. And this transitions us nicely to autofocus. Both cameras use Canon's dual pixel autofocus system, but that does not mean that they're the same. The M50 has between 99 and 143 autofocus points, depending on which lens you're using, while the M6 Mark II has 5,481 autofocus points. Focusing brightness range is also improved on the M6 Mark II, from -2 to -5 EV, allowing it to focus better in lower light situations. Both cameras offer eye detection in one-shot AF mode, but the M6 Mark II offers eye detection when tracking a subject for burst shooting and for video. This gives us an extra level of precision for video, and I absolutely love this when I'm shooting portraits because I don't have to worry about getting the focus point exactly on the subject's eye, and I can just concentrate on framing. When shooting with these cameras facing me, I'm completely confident that my face is identified, it's being tracked, we're not going to get any kind of hunting. The IF has been very consistent for me with the M6 Mark II, and if eyes are not detected, it reverts back to face tracking. Something that I mentioned earlier in the video, but I want to bring up again, is that the M6 Mark II uses the dual pixel autofocus system even when you're shooting in 4K, where the M50 switches to an inferior contrast detection system, which is slower, less accurate, and struggles in low light situations. Moving on, both cameras also offer subject tracking, which is great, and it can be activated using the touchscreen, and the interface is super intuitive and easy to use with both cameras. You simply click on the subject on the LCD and the camera will continue to track it as it moves through the frame. One other feature that I really like is the ability to easily rack focus from one subject to another by clicking on it using the touchscreen. So I like the fact that I can talk about one thing while I have it in focus and then click on another item in the frame when I want to shift the viewer's attention to it. So to recap my opinion about the autofocus, it worked really well for both stills and video with both cameras, but overall I find the M6 Mark II's autofocus system to be superior for both photography and video. Next, I want to talk about lens options, and I think a lot of people forget to look at this part when they shop for a camera. When you buy a camera, you're actually buying into an entire lens system, and there are two major considerations there. First, what lenses are available and at what cost, and second, what happens when you want to upgrade a body or if you have multiple bodies. Both of these cameras use Canon's EFM mount, and there are some great lenses from Canon like the 32mm f1.4 and the 22mm f2. Both cameras can also use an adapter which allows us to use all of Canon's EF and EFS mount lenses. If we really want to take advantage of the M6 Mark II's higher resolution sensor, that means we would need to use higher end lenses. If we're adding third-party options here, then Sigma just released 3 fast EFM primes, the 16-30 and 56mm f1.4, but as I mentioned before, if you're going to use the kit lens or any of the EFM zoom lenses, you're unlikely to notice a big difference. Both cameras can use a speed booster like this one from Comlight, which does two really impressive things for us. First, it's a focal range reducer with a crop of 0.71, meaning that if we took something like the L-Series 24-70 f2.8 and we're shooting at 24, that would normally give us about a 38mm equivalent field of view when using it on an APS-C sensor. But now we can multiply that by 0.71 and get approximately a 27mm field of view. It's not exactly like using the 24 on a full frame sensor camera, but it's a significant improvement over the 38mm equivalent field of view. Not only that, we're also able to gather more light than the original lens setting. So instead of an f2.8, it now becomes an effective f2.0 lens, which lets a lot more light onto the sensor and gives us an even shallower depth of field for additional separation from the background. If this was a little confusing, let me know in the comments section below and I'll create a dedicated video about how the speed booster works and all the advantages that it offers. Moving on, let's talk a little about the screen. Both cameras offer a 1.04 million dot 3-inch touchscreen, but the M50 offers a fully articulating touchscreen, whereas the M6 Mark II has a tilt screen. Both screens can be tilted down for when the camera is above your eye level and can be tilted up for when you're shooting from the hip or when the camera is positioned low to the ground. Both screens can also be flipped 180 degrees to face the front for when you're shooting video and you're in front of the camera, or for shooting selfies. But of course the M50 flips out to the side and the M6 Mark II flips up. A major advantage of the M50 is that the screen can also be positioned to face both sides, which is helpful on a gimbal, slider, or when you're shooting vertical photos with the camera above or below eye level. Because I do regularly run into all of these situations, this is something that I very much value in a camera. And at the same time, I concede that not every person uses their camera the way I do. Another consideration with this design is that if you plan on using an external shotgun microphone, you won't be able to flip the screen of the M6 Mark II up because the screen will hit the back of the microphone. You can use something like the Rode Wireless Go and then clip it to the monitor or to the hinge mechanism. Another option would be to get an L bracket or a cage for additional mounting options with the M6 Mark II. Both cameras offer full touchscreen functionality, so you can navigate the menu, select options and features from the screen, and touch or drag to focus. The next set of features I want to bring up have to do with audio. Both the M50 and the M6 Mark II have an external mic input, so you can use an external microphone to get much better audio right into the camera, and check out the individual reviews for audio samples with both the built-in mics and external microphones. The M6 Mark II has a couple of advantages when it comes to audio. First, the audio levels are always displayed on the LCD when you're in movie mode. So as you're preparing to record or even while you're recording, you can see the levels. On the M6 Mark II, you can also adjust the levels from the quick menu without having to go into the main menu. But neither camera allows you to modify audio levels during recording, which is a great feature we saw in the 90D. I published a video discussing the importance of audio for video, and I will link to it up in the corner and in the description. I also want to talk about other features that could help you make a buying decision, and these are all features of the M6 Mark II. First, it has the option of using an electronic shutter, which allows you to take images silently without hearing the shutter mechanism, and can be a great option for when you're in a quiet environment and you don't want to draw attention to yourself. Next, the M6 Mark II has a setting for minimum shutter speed with auto ISO, which is an excellent feature for when you want the camera to increase the ISO rather than slow down the shutter speed. This works really well when you're shooting in low light and you don't want the shutter speed to get so low that it introduces motion blur. The next feature I want to mention is focus bracketing, which is great for increasing depth of field. The M6 Mark II will automatically take multiple photos while slightly shifting the focus plane so that you can create a composite image in post and create a deeper depth of field, which can be very useful for macro. Okay, so which camera is a better value and which one should you get? I think it depends on your priorities. At the time I'm making this video, the M50 costs $579 and the M6 Mark II costs $850. So that may contribute to your final decision. The M50 is less expensive, which leaves you more money to spend on lenses and accessories, has a fully articulating touchscreen, a built-in viewfinder, and allows you to use an external flash or trigger while using the viewfinder. The M6 Mark II has better autofocus, better low light performance, uncropped 4K with dual pixel autofocus, 120 frames per second for slow motion, more controls, an electronic shutter option, a clean HDMI out, faster continuous shooting, and a 30 frames per second raw burst mode. I always say that you can't have everything in every camera, so it comes down to what's important to you. And I do my best to answer every comment and question, and I'm happy to continue the conversation with you in the comment section. I'll put links in the description to where you can get the M50 and the M6 Mark II, as well as some popular kits and accessories. There are always holiday specials and discounts, and those links will automatically be updated with the lowest pricing. If you end up ordering anything at all using those links, you can help support my channel for free and help me create more content for you, so thank you in advance. I also put links in the description to the more detailed video about each camera in case you want a more in-depth review. I really hope I was able to give you a good comparison between the Canon M50 and the M6 Mark II. I'd love to hear in the comment section which option is best for you. If this video was helpful, please let me know by giving it a thumbs up, tweet it, share it, and if you're interested in more camera reviews and tutorials, join the community by hitting the subscribe and notification buttons. You can always find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Tech Gear Talk. You know what I always say, buy it nice or buy it twice. Good luck and see you soon.